The Narrow Road to the Deep North by Richard Flanagan. The novel is centred around Dorigo Evans, an Australian surgeon who becomes a prisoner of war in Japan on the Thai-Burma Railway. The narrative shifts between Dorigo's present and his memories of a love affair and his memories of a childhood as well as being at the camp. Even though the novel is centred around Dorigo, I think one of the great things about this text is, in a way, Richard Flanagan's humanity, because he not only shares the perspective of Dorigo and the other POWs, he also shares the perspective of the Japanese guards. If we're looking at the story of the guard, Flanagan exposes their thought processes and the forced ideology that was kind of put on them as to why they were building this railway. Flanagan isn't holding up these Japanese guards and saying they're the ones that are evil. It is the ideology. And I think that's one thing that's really important about this novel. It's about the dangers of when ideology starts saying that certain people are superior to other people. One thing that really fascinated me about this novel was actually the structure, because it's in different parts, but each chapter is absolutely tiny. I mean, there are a couple of chapters at least that are just a page long. Because of the non-linear structure, you are constantly shifting through time. You are constantly brought back to the war, to the painful memories of these characters, to Dorigo's love affair. This would be a really great book to look at trauma theory with, because you are just as trapped as the characters with these memories. You have to return every time, and it is hard to read. I mean, there are plenty of times in this book where I had to put it down because it was just too uncomfortable, and it is incredibly moving. In regards to the structure, there is also this bit where Dorigo is actually writing a foreword to a book, and he ends the foreword with, "And no one will ever know. Their names are already forgotten. There is no book for their lost souls. Let them have this fragment." The word fragment is just absolutely key, because these chapters, this book is fragmented, and it becomes broken almost just in the same way that these men in the prisoner of war camps, their bodies are broken. But also the idea of a book as a fragment, as each chapter as a different fragment to actually memorialise, in a way, the huge loss of life. One of the key themes in this book is memory and how we memorialise things. At the beginning of the foreword, Richard Flanagan writes, "After all, no one will really remember it. Like the greatest crimes, it will be as if it never happened. The suffering, the deaths, the sorrow, the abject, pathetic pointlessness of such immense suffering by so many. Maybe it all exists only within these pages and the pages of a few other books. Horror can be contained within a book, given form and meaning, but in life horror has no more form than it does meaning. Horror just is." That section, and really the entire novel on the futility of war, really reminded me of The Things They Carry by Tim O'Brien. O'Brien actually served in Vietnam, and the structure, in a similar way to kind of The Narrow Road to the Deep North, it is in short sections, but each section is a story. But it's not a short story collection, it's this kind of postmodernist novel. But one of the stories that really hit me, and I think is really relevant to kind of my reading of The Narrow Road to the Deep North, is called How to Tell a True War Story. O'Brien writes, "If at the end of a war story you feel uplifted, or if you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made a victim of a very old and terrible lie. There is no rectitude whatsoever. There is no virtue." The best emblem, really, for the futility of war is in the novel itself. It's the Death Railway. The railway was pointless, it was never used, but yet so many people lost their lives trying to build it. Talking about the railway as an emblem brings me perfectly onto the title of this book. The Narrow Road to the Deep North is actually a piece of writing by the Japanese poet Basho. Basho's work documents his journey to the north of Japan, and it's a narrow road, it's a difficult journey, and the journey itself becomes a metaphor for life. There is no real end to this travel, it's a continuation. This novel is really about how do you continue after traumatic events. And obviously the narrow road is literally the railway. You can definitely tell that Richard Flanagan was influenced by Japanese literature, because his writing is so economical in the way that it kind of breaks down in a really beautiful way. And that beauty can sometimes be really difficult to deal with, because what he's describing is not beautiful, it's horrific. That complexity is really the reason that I think this novel is so brilliant. In the way that Basho's Now Road to Deep North is classed as one of the greatest pieces of Japanese literature, and Richard Flanagan's The Now Road to the Deep North documents an atrocity in Japanese history. Beauty and horror are not separate, in the way that good and evil exist in the same flesh, in the way that the Japanese guards are not evil and the Australian prisoner of wars are not all good. It is a novel that's fundamentally about the complexity of humanity, and I think it's pretty incredible. There is actually a quote in The Now Road to the Deep North which is about rereading books and about how a good book, when you reread it, is actually about rereading your soul, and the fact that actually this book was making me question my own beliefs about war, or how society kind of tells us war stories, I think is a true testament to the power of this book.